Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Collaborating Across Systems, Making the Most of Our Partnerships. This is a webinar offered by the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators, otherwise known as NASHIA. My name is Judy Detmer, and I am the Director for Strategic Partnerships for NASHIA, and I will be your moderator today. Maria Crowley, who's the Director for Professional Development, will be your organizer today. So thank you for joining us. And then Rebecca Wolfkill will be introducing our speaker in just a minute. Just a few housekeeping and information slides. Now, NASHIA is a nonprofit organization which was created to assist state government in promoting partnerships and building systems to meet the needs of individuals with brain injuries and their families. If you're not familiar with us, please become familiar with us. We'd love to help you out. Next slide. We're using GoToWebinar today for our platform, and you can see if there's a way to call if you're having any questions or problems. You can use the control panel for questions for the webinar, and there are also handouts in the control panel. Today's webinar will be offering continuing education credits for social work and CRCC. We'll also be offering certificates of attendance, and the recording will be archived, and you can find it at NASHIA.org under that URL. If you go to NASHIA.org and Google, you'll also find it in addition to the URL. I'm going to actually turn this over to Rebecca Wolfkill, who's our Executive Director, and she'll be introducing Teja, who I just want to say a personal thank you to Teja because her and I have worked very closely together, and I'm super excited that you'll be doing this webinar for us. So Rebecca, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Judy. I am so excited to be able to introduce our guest speaker today. I think many of you know, if you've frequented other webinars that we've hosted, that NASHIA really does prioritize partnerships as a way of being effective both among states and at the national level. We know partnerships are essential, and Teja's presentation today is going to highlight some of those important partnerships among the states across the country, and I hope plant some seeds for you all on ways that you can replicate some of these partnerships and continue to build different collaborations across the country. We at NASHIA have really so enjoyed our partnership with NASDDDS over the past many years. When I came into this role as Executive Director 3 years ago, NASDDDS Executive Director Mary Sowers immediately became a partner, and we got to work right away trying to figure out ways that as organizations we could serve both of our members best, and we know that the NASDDDS members and the NASHIA members and the communities that we serve are all working together in the field, and we want to do everything that we can as organizations to support you all so that you can work together to meet your mission. As Judy mentioned, Teja and Judy have been working together too over the last couple of years, and that has been the results. One of the results is this webinar today. So, I want to thank Teja. I want to thank NASDDDS. They really do walk the walk as it relates to partnerships, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentation today, Teja. So I'm going to just take a moment and read Teja's formal bio so everyone has your background, and then I will pass it over to Teja. But for those of you that have not yet met Teja, Teja is the Director of Contracts and Strategic Partnerships for the National Association of State Directors of Developmental Disability Services, NASDDDS. She provides a broad range of technical assistance to states on issues related to Medicaid structure and quality, organizational success strategies, and effective service modalities. Before joining NASDDDS, Ms. Stokes served as Director in the Government Health and Human Services Division at IBM Watson Health. She has held various positions within the Virginia state government, supporting policy development, community-based behavioral health, and provision of developmental disability services. She also has extensive experience in change management, improvement, process mapping, strategic planning, process improvement, and group facilitation. So again, thank you so much, Teja, for joining us today, and I look forward to learning from you.
Well, thank you all very much for having me. I really appreciate, Rebecca, the kind words, and Judy, our partnership that has flourished over the last couple of years. It's been great fun. We both came into our positions about the same time and have been learning together, but it's been an absolute joy, and also working with Maria as well. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really tickled to be here to talk about collaboration and how to do that in good ways to result in good outcomes. We can go on to the next slide, Maria, and to the next slide. So last September, for the NASHIA conference, I was invited to take part in a presentation and talk about Medicaid authorities and how to use those to develop services and supports for individuals with brain injury. And within that presentation, I briefly talked about how establishing the Medicaid-funded services really are built on a strong relationship with the state Medicaid authority. Talked about the importance of there being personal relationships, that having ongoing and consistent communication is pretty critical, the necessity of education of Medicaid agency partners, and establishing accountability checks to aid in long-term success. So after that presentation, and as we've been talking about the work that I do with Judy, we got this brainstorm, had this great idea to do a presentation for NASHIA members about successful collaboration and in resulting in better supports for the brain injury community. So I've had some really great collaborative experiences, NASHIA and NASDDDS being one of them, but many others over the course of my career. And I wanted to learn about how NASHIA members approach collaboration at the state level to gain success and outcomes for people with brain injury. So I had an opportunity to talk with 4 states, Chris Miller in Virginia, Sarah Lane in Vermont, Stephanie O'Day in Maryland, April Turner in Alabama, and I thoroughly enjoyed talking with each of these fabulous leaders in brain injury services and discovering how their work offers great illustrations for effective collaboration. So you'll hear me talk about my conversations with them throughout the presentation today. We can go to the next slide. So I put a few quotes on here. I love all of them. I'm not going to read them all, but I just felt like it was a great illustration of how many people understand the value of effective collaboration. And by no means am I an expert in effective collaboration. I've just been part of good collaboration and some not so good collaboration. So I feel like I know it when I see it and when I'm part of it. And as the quote says here, Amit Ray, sometimes in the collaboration, I feel like I'm the wind, sometimes I'm the bee, sometimes I'm the flower. But you know, understanding I'm a part of a greater movement to make things happen. And so in thinking about it, I asked myself, you know, do I know enough about collaboration to speak about it? So I started pecking around and doing some research, and I found that there's a ton of information out there that I could use to guide our discussion today. And in doing so, I found common threads and threads that I've actually experienced myself. And then also through the conversations with April, Stephanie, Chris, and Sarah, kind of a little informal study emerged as a result of that. And I was able to uncover that their strategies, whether they were intentional or unintentional, really tied directly to what I found in the research that's out there. We can go to the next slide. So I found this great definition of collaboration. It's a collective work of 2 or more individuals where the work is undertaken with a sense of shared purpose and direction that is attentive, responsive, and adaptive to the environment. So it really takes into account an awareness of what's going on around and within the collaboration, and you'll hear me talk a little bit about that today. The importance of access to information and knowledge goes hand in hand with understanding the effects of that environment on the stakeholders and customers that are tied to the collaboration. And it really goes into creating positive change and becoming a primary force for generating meaning and commitment to the collaboration. So I really like this definition, so I wanted to put it in front of you today. Next slide, please. So I bet you're asking, because I asked myself this question, isn't collaboration just good teamwork? And I would say that what I found is the short answer is no. So as you see here on the slide, teamwork is working together to accomplish goals, and each person within the team has their own responsibilities. It's a little more siloed. There's a team leader that resolves issues and guides the work, and members really don't necessarily have to have shared values. Versus a collaboration is a deeper level of engagement where the values are shared, and that promotes the ability for team members to solve problems and come to resolution without leadership involvement. And the team leader acts more as a guide rather than controlling the process. We can go to the next slide. So I feel like, and I bet you feel the same, that there are really many great reasons to approach our work in the spirit of collaboration, especially if we think about that differentiation between teamwork and collaboration. It really allows you to rally around a common cause, getting that sense of community ownership and buy-in for the purpose of the collaboration. Often in unexpected ways, it opens up new and improved communication channels. It really allows you to take the interdependencies of the collaboration's partners and build on them, because the effectiveness of one partner is tied to the effectiveness of the other. So again, that skin in the game, you're helping one another out, much like NASHIA and NASDDDS do. In some cases, through a collaboration, you get greater efficiency of resources and maybe even reduce duplication. You're able to maximize resources because you gain a better understanding of influences on funding and practice. You get much better creativity, improved productivity, and better satisfaction. I personally feel like I get more meaningful engagement through collaboration, and I think it's just downright fun. And it also aligns processes and creates common systems, which we're all about in our work for both NASHIA and NASDDDS, to achieve a higher success rate of the goal and the best outcomes for all. And what I say to underscore all of this is that we're better together. Next slide. So great, wonderful idea. Collaboration seems simple enough. But what really is good collaboration? And that was the nature of what I wanted to understand for this conversation today, and was the crux of the digging around I did on the internet. And as I said, lots of stuff out there. And in learning about it for myself, I found that there are several things that do demonstrate effective collaboration. Those are shared values and goals, good communication, and capacity building. Those were the things that showed up over and over again related to effective collaboration. I also saw this notion of leveraging difference, and it wasn't something that I saw in the literature a lot, but I really found the concept to be pretty compelling, and so I thought it might be good to take a closer look. On slide 9, yeah, we can go to the next one now. So in the work that I've done over the years, as Rebecca talked about in my bio, I do a fair amount of strategic and futures planning with groups and individuals and families. And when I facilitate this type of planning, I always say you have to know where you're going before you know how to get there. And so we today are going to start with values and goals. Next slide. It bared out in the research that I was doing on this topic over and over that vision clarity is the key, if not the #1 element of effective collaboration. You've got to first establish what the purpose of the collaboration is, the mutual benefit, the mutual purpose, and really how it can resonate with people and be meaningful on a personal level. You also want the vision, the values and goals to have a direction that is energizing and challenging for the members of the collaboration to keep them engaged. You want it to be challenging enough, but not seemingly insurmountable. It's also important to know why you're coming together, why overcoming the particular challenge of the collaboration matters, and I love this, what is at stake if you do nothing. And I think that really is, like I said, very compelling to me. You want to ensure the vision and goals are inspiring and consequential, something that everyone can get behind. We know that the work that we do is like rolling a rock up the hill, and so you got to make sure everybody's willing to get behind that rock because it might roll back. So making sure that again, it's something that everyone's willing to take part in, and also not being afraid to stretch, thinking long term, and being bold about that vision. Next slide. So this is an example from the work that I do in futures and strategic planning. I use a tool called PATH, Planning Alternative Tomorrows with Hope, and it's a graphics, person-centered planning tool that it was designed to be used with individuals and families, but I've also found a great utility in working with groups and organizations over the years. And this is a shared vision of a path that we used several years ago for a statewide collaborative on a systems transformation grant. It really is a shoot for the moon. That's why we called it the North Star of the vision, and really allows you to look for those stretch possibilities. Next slide. So it's great to know why you're collaborating, but the other thing that I found in studying up on this is that you also, in knowing what you're striving for, have to have agreements and structure within the collaboration, setting those ground rules and team agreements so that the collaborators feel that what they bring is being recognized and is important, and maybe even in some cases protected. It's establishing norms within the group that foster positive dynamics and discourage dysfunction within and around the collaboration. So that, again, I talked about this notion earlier, you need the collaboration, the people that are coming to the table to work together to be strong, but also to make sure that ecosystem outside of the collaboration is also strong, and you understand what the structure is around it. And it's important to also, in establishing these team agreements or ground rules, explicitly reiterating those from time to time, checking in to make sure that they are still the things that are helping to drive those agreements and structure within the group. It's also important within the establishment of the structure to know what the roles and responsibilities of the collaborators will be, who's driving the work, and that includes, once there's success has been achieved from the collaboration, who's going to be responsible for continuing to drive things going forward. Sometimes it might not come to an end, but if it does, you've got to know who's taking the lead. Determining a plan for turning strategy into action. We've got to have those good work plans, and making sure that within that you also know when you might have to make course corrections in the work that's being done. And then clearly, and I think we all know this from the work that we do, we also have to know how we're going to measure success. What is it when we see it? Next slide. So I put a few examples here of some ground rules and team agreements that I have facilitated or been a part of over the years. And then I also saw too, in pecking around about good collaboration, that ground rules or team agreements can be referenced as a relationship charter, and I really like that, so I thought I'd mention it. As you can see, these are important group norms and expectations to the collaborations that develop them. A few of my favorites from these particular examples: keeping an eye on the goal. As I said, you always got to know where you're going before you know how you get there. No one knows everything, but together we know a lot. That's another favorite of mine. Also a favorite, parking egos at the door. We all recognize that there's sometimes hidden agendas, but you got to kind of leave them to the side when you're coming together to really make sure that you have good collaboration. And then maintain communication. And I bet you're not going to be surprised, but these are going to show up again as we progress through the conversation today. Next slide. These are some examples also from my previous work, examples of some action strategies and one of success measurement. The path image up on the left, it really referenced the short and long-term strategies to achieve that North Star or long-term vision. The one at the bottom is a specific, more detailed work plan that included action steps, timelines, responsibilities, resources, communication strategies, and potential barriers. And then to the right, there's an aim statement, which really establishes that measure of success. This is built on an aim statement built from the model for improvement on knowing if an improvement or change worked. Next slide. So I also found that successful collaborations also recognize the importance of collective impact. And what we mean by that is determining the perspectives that will help you unlock your challenge. And I really also love that notion, that phrase, unlock your challenge. What do you need to make it happen? Do you have the right people at the table, the right perspectives, or do you need to be at someone else's table? And that was one of the things in talking with Stephanie and April that I learned about that make them successful is, you know, they don't just look for collective impact in their sphere, they also look where they can have collective impact in other systems or spheres. You want to make sure you're bringing together collaborators that can pose a different vantage point, those unexpected voices, so that you can avoid groupthink. It's also important to involve our key stakeholders as partners at the heart of a compelling direction. And in our world, we know that the people we serve and support are those people with disabilities are the heart of our compelling direction. And so their voices are often the most important in our collaborations. And I found in talking with Chris that also holds true in Virginia, that by bringing those key stakeholders to the table, she was able to build some champions related to brain injury issues within the service system because she was able to share the voice of the individuals who directly are impacted by services and supports. There's a cautionary tale, though, that you know, it's good to add members to ensure that you've got the requisite skills and diversity, but sometimes increasing size comes with a cost. Larger teams can be more vulnerable to poor communication and fragmentation and lack of accountability. So in establishing your collaboration, looking for those different perspectives, you also have to be hyper vigilant about, you know, maybe making it too big or too cumbersome. And then here on the slide, just a little pictorial from a path that I did listing potential collaborators for achieving the North Star. Next slide. So when people convene to work together, there's a risk of setting values and goals that aren't bold enough. So I looked at Langley's improvement guide and found some things to think about to push the envelope, to creatively plan, or setting that BHAG, as I talked to Chris about, that big, hairy, audacious goal. So one way to creatively plan is to challenge boundaries and determining where boundaries may be defining the current challenge and how they can be removed to make path for progress. Another option is rearranging the order of operations. It might be the steps that we take aren't the wrong steps. It's just they might be happening in a different sequence and be presenting problems to solving the challenge. Is the current flow a boundary in and of itself? There's also opportunity to look for ways in smoothing the process, or there are just some small glitches that with a little tweaking and refinement can help address the issue. Other ways to creatively plan, challenging why something is done a certain way. This is, you know, well, we've always done it this way. Well, do we have to really buy into that? Why is it happening? Does it have to? Is it still a necessity? Visualizing the ideal. So again, thinking about that long-term goal, that vision, that North Star, and is that a way to generate some ideas for change? And then sometimes it takes turning the whole process up on end and totally removing an approach or process in order to make way for new ideas and alternatives. Next slide. Oh, I was going to get a little drink of water. So as I said, I love talking with your counterparts in the 4 states featured today. So many great things happening, very exciting, and even better, they're doing things that help to tell the good collaboration story we're talking about today. So in Virginia, Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services and Department of Medical Assistance Services, the Medicaid agency, they're currently in the process of establishing some shared goals for gathering experience of care data through the National Core Indicators Aging and Disability Survey. In Maryland, the Money Follows the Person stakeholder group has a shared vision of growing the brain injury waiver, also very exciting. In Vermont, I found in talking with Sarah that the brain injury representatives on the state-required disability aging and independent living advisory board has been a real game change. And I think it's also an excellent example of avoiding groupthink because they're establishing some subcommittees for brain injury issues specifically, but they're bringing in voices from that larger advisory committee to round out that collaboration. And then in Alabama, they've progressed from goals set within a grant application to a shared vision of the collaborators around the grant for the brain injury population belonging to all of us. And I love that quote, so felt like it was worthy of being on the slide here. Next one, Maria, please. So I'm sure it doesn't come as a surprise to you that good communication is another important aspect of effective collaboration. It goes without saying, probably you're thinking, oh, this is stuff I already know. Why are we talking about this? But I find that I personally need periodic nudges about good communication. It's, easy to slip up from time to time. And so I really enjoyed reading up on this aspect of good collaboration to prepare for the conversation today. And so I hope that you find, little nudges for yourself in here too. Next slide. So shared decision-making is, a model that we're familiar with in healthcare. Patients and service recipients play a role in decisions that affect their health or community-based supports. And we all know the importance of supporting individuals with disabilities to exercise choice and control over their lives to make their own decisions. But it's a good principle for effective collaboration as well. So why not practice what we preach in our supports for people with disabilities? Shared decision-making creates empowerment or skin in the game and removes those traditional power dynamics in relationships. And this is something that I learned, both of these concepts are early in my career as a job coach for people with developmental disabilities. I had an opportunity as a very young person to be a part of an agency-wide initiative that involves some pretty high-level leaders, directors and executive directors, finance leaders to come together in this particular collaboration. And it was really wonderful and a great way for these leaders to model for someone so young and impressionable as myself that if you park your title at the door, it really does change that dynamic within the group. It ends up leading to better and more effective communication, sets up those shared values and goals to be the driver of decisions and doesn't allow those hidden agendas to creep in. And it really allows for that wide open view to make sure that you're thinking about risks and benefits when making decisions. Next slide. So you also won't be surprised that, I'm going to talk about the fact that listening, not just hearing, is a key component of good communication, affecting good collaboration. And it's something we all can improve on. I definitely know that I can. So I think it's about listening actively, reflectively, and empathetically. And I wanted to break those each down a little bit. So active listening is, listening carefully, including using nonverbal cues, observing what's going on, paying attention, understanding, responding, and remembering what is being said. Reflective listening, seeking to understand someone's idea and then being able to offer it back to confirm that you understand. And then empathetically listening is giving an outlet for emotions, openness, shared experiences, and being accepting of new perspectives. All of this requires you to turn off the internal dialogue. And if I'm honest, I find myself doing that probably more than I care to admit. And I tend to pay attention to when I'm doing it because someone very special in my life does this, and I can see them planning what they're going to say next. And so I really try when I'm being a good listener to just turn that internal dialogue off. Making sure that I'm asking questions just to seek for understanding, because I don't want to be too busy figuring out what questions I want to ask next and interfere with what I am hearing. Avoiding the trap of interrupting because you don't want to give the impression that you don't care about what the person has to say, or that you think your voice or ideas are more important than theirs. And then, of course, as I said, being attentive to those non-verbal cues, what's not being said, because words only convey a portion of the message. And I found that in talking with Chris and Virginia, in her collaborations with behavioral health and developmental disability service providers, that it's important to listen carefully to find out what's in it for them in the collaboration to ultimately result in an evolution in the grassroots embracing brain injury issues and needs. So I thought that was pretty cool. Next slide. So we could probably have an entire discussion about the soft skills, but I want to talk about a few more things about understanding that within communication and collaborating with others, that you have to see the other people in the collaboration as people themselves, and that we're not just our role, we're not just our title, but that we are humans and people too. By employing those soft skills, we really give way to resilience and commitment and camaraderie that's needed to get the group through inevitable adversity. We know adversity comes up in teamwork, collaboration, whatever, and you've got to have those things in place to make sure you can overcome that. And a lot of that is built in taking time to getting to know one another, looking for and finding the value that others have to offer. I also find success in approaching relationships with humility, and that includes cultural humility. And one of the favorite things that I've learned through the COVID pandemic is that we all carry an emotional backpack. And sometimes that backpack is heavy, and sometimes it's light. It really, effective communication and relationships are built on an understanding of the emotional backpacks that we all wear, including the cultural considerations within those backpacks and how that might be influencing someone in the collaboration. Also, as a part of understanding that people are involved in collaboration is creating that supportive context, fostering a bridge to we, committing to the relationship building long term and tending those relationships. And one of the things I call upon frequently when I think about this is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and that emotional bank account. And the way that you attend to those relationships is continually to make deposits and less withdrawals from that emotional bank account. And then being generous with acknowledgement and opportunity and benefits of the collaboration, because giving makes getting more sustainable. And sometimes you just got to go old school, pick up the phone, or meet one-on-one to get clarification or enhance the collaboration. And I found in my conversations with April in Alabama, this is a clear tipping point for her. She is largely successful because she has used one-on-one encounters to develop very deep and personal relationships within the collaboration, and she continually tends to those, and that has really paid off for her. Next slide. So all the things that we just talked about really help to develop trust, but there's some other tips here that I thought were important to highlight. Creating quick wins for everyone involved in the collaboration. If you feel like you've got some momentum, you can build on that. A key one for me, this is something that I have found has paid off in dividends, is honoring my commitments and promises and being timely about it. But if I can't follow through or I encounter challenges, communicating right away also helps to build trust. Making sure that you have those voices, that diverse perspective helps to redistribute the power imbalance. And then, of course, honesty and transparency, also something that I have found is important. I appreciate getting it, and I appreciate giving it. Next slide. So some of the strongest examples from all 4 states were about good and persistent communication being the heart of their success. And so I chose some quotes from the conversations to illustrate how each of the 4 featured states are using good communication for their successful collaboration. In Alabama, getting to know one another, regular communication, and having those individual meetings outside of the group that I mentioned. April really felt like she got looped in more because she invited others to take part in some of her initiatives in a particular task force, and that was a payoff for her. In Vermont, better integrating brain injury into what exists and asking the question, how can we? And knowing what I need to do versus what I need versus what you do. In Virginia, having to listen rather than just tell. We've talked about that already a little bit. Coming with something to give and creating those personal connections. And in Maryland, start listening first. Don't be afraid to ask and to be persistent. Next slide. So as I mentioned at the top of my remarks, that this notion of leveraging difference really didn't show up much consistently in the research related to what the tenets are of effective collaboration, but it really resounded with me. And then in having the conversations with Chris and April and Stephanie and Sarah, it turns out that this notion is very much in play in all 4 states. So I really wanted to bring it forward and spend a few minutes to talk about it. Next slide. So we all have strengths, but we also have the ability to grow, develop, and change. And so you have to think about the collaborators are greater than the sum of the parts. We have to realize that there are differences and we have to seek to understand them and then how to use them for the benefit of the collaboration. One of the greatest opportunities of collaboration is finding how each of the partners can complement one another and then use that to achieve the overall vision and goals. You've got to also appreciate the context for collaborators keeps changing. That ecosystem that I mentioned earlier is in flux. And so you've got to be flexible about changes to those circumstances and how they might influence the collaboration, not assuming that anything is static when you begin working together. And then also remembering that you don't want to assume that you're trying to strive for a homogeneous voice. That's not the case at all. You don't want to dampen or eliminate the differences. You want to exploit those differences within the collaboration and use them to your advantage. And that was something that Sarah really was able to talk to me about, that she was successful in finding collaborations in, complements in Vermont. Her collaborations with homelessness services, Department of Corrections, and domestic violence supports, all of those being very different systems, but by collaborating and leveraging those differences, they were also able to find common ground. Next slide. So what is it they say? We don't know what we don't know. But I find it essential to come to a collaboration ready to educate others and to be educated, seeking to understand. And that allows us to come prepared to work together. It opens up important lines of communication and inquiry that influence those shared values and goals. Educating one another about our own experiences, knowledge, and needs for what we're coming to the collaboration for, and not making assumptions about what people understand regarding your issues or skills that you're coming to the collaboration with, and vice versa. And of course, that persistence, don't give up. And that was one of the things that I talked to Stephanie about in Maryland, that she just is very persistent, doesn't give up. She keeps coming to the table And in her words, keep saying it until everyone else is saying it, so that they embrace brain injury issues because they've heard her talk about it over and over again. And another concept that she and I talked about that I absolutely adore is that sometimes you have to disguise your advocacy points as information. So I thought that was a really good nugget to share with you. Next slide. So even though that there wasn't a lot of research that didn't show up in the research related to leveraging difference, gosh, I'm getting tongue-tied. It is a consistent theme in effective collaboration, and that I did, as I said, heard across the 4 states loud and clear, especially regarding the need to educate collaborators about the brain injury population. And being receptive to learn about those other systems and populations to figure out where brain injury can fit into the puzzle. So in Maryland, there's been success in looking for related resources that will help work for the brain injury population. In Vermont, they've been successful in using data to educate AAAs and home health providers and getting into that education component for leveraging difference. Alabama partnerships got brain injury matters to the table because the collaborators were open to learning about brain injury needs. And then in Virginia, Chris was able to anticipate some resistance and found how brain injury fit into the existing community-based system. So even though she knew that those differences were in play, she was able to learn about them, anticipate them, and factor them into her work. Next slide. So last but not least, I want to talk a little bit about capacity building, and we can go to the next slide. So I have found, and I bet you have too, that good collaboration doesn't come ready-made. And as I said previously, you've got to think about capacity building within the collaboration, as well as in order to influence effectively improving the capacity building within the service system. So it's within and outside, and they're symbiotic relationships. As I talked about previously, it's important to grab that low-hanging fruit to establish quick wins and build upon them. That's a very strategic element of capacity building. Making strides of your progress visible. I call that bring and brag. You want to tell everybody as much as you can all of the time about the progress that you're making and the successes that you're achieving. You want to look for opportunities to build both adaptive and technical capacity. That's the ability to collaborate or influence others and to share in leadership. And then technical capacity is fundraising, staffing, communications, and you need both of those to generate that capacity building within and outside of the collaboration. And then knowing when you might have to make efforts to strengthen the collaboration's ecosystem. I've mentioned that a couple times, and it may mean bringing in other partners to the collaboration, but also it might be relying on resources like consultants or technical assistants to help you build up that capacity. And then, as I mentioned already, using results and data to tell your story. Showing versus claiming is a really excellent way of being strategic in your capacity building. And I found a good example of this in Vermont. They were able to use a recent grant to revitalize and build up the Brain Injury Advisory Board. So building that internal capacity was a very strategic move to do that and strengthen the collaboration. Next slide. So to build capacity, we've talked about shooting for the stars, but you sometimes also have to think on a little smaller scale and build that capacity gradually. As we've said before, there's quick wins and building on them. And I think about this in the concept of rapid cycle testing, either through Plan, Do, Study, Act or Plan, Do, Check, Act, if you're familiar with those terms. And recognizing that wins and fails produce learning. It's okay to fail because you learn from it. Starting small also means focusing on some terminology that I use in path planning, focusing on what's positive and possible. And then, remembering it's a journey, not a trip, that it's important to celebrate those small wins, brag about them, as I said previously. And Stephanie had some real sage advice in my conversations with her about Maryland. that you really have to look back at your accomplishments, because always looking forward can be overwhelming, and that's just absolutely brilliant. Next slide. Capacity building risks stalling if you allow complacency to creep in, and you don't want to make assumptions that things are going well enough. So ways that you can assure that you're avoiding complacency is continually assessing what you're doing as a part of your regular meetings or scheduled, you might make a scheduled event about it, but it's this periodic quick temperature checks coupled with interval diagnosis at a deeper level to really know whether or not you've reached that stall point. As I said before, tending the relationships. This intersects with the other things we discussed about communication. It's, this isn't one and done. And I found that April was a really great illustration of that in the way in which she tends the relationships in her collaborations. I got a note last week from someone that I regularly collaborate with, and it was a fabulous and very timely example of relationship tending. She was sending me a lovely note about how much she appreciated me, and she was doing her part to make deposits to our relationship and collaboration, and I definitely enjoyed receiving it. Also important is to get regular feedback. And as I said, thinking about that ecosystem, both within the collaboration and outside of it. And outside of it, we would get that feedback from our stakeholders. And then knowing when you need new voices or additional collaborators to ultimately build your capacity. Next slide. So again, more great examples from our 4 featured states. Vermont was able to build capacity through the merge of that advisory council so that brain injury is a part of the greater statewide initiative. They didn't just stop at a separate advisory council for brain injury being good enough, and I thought that was really fabulous. Alabama collaborating is achieving an expansion of brain injury services to all community mental health centers. And this is, again, as I said, a result of April's tending of relationships within the collaboration. Virginia using data and grants to establish a statewide online training for substance use treatment related to individuals with brain injury. And they were able to do this by getting feedback that informed their capacity building. And then the use of state mandated annual reports in Maryland allow for highlight of brain injury needs and create that capacity building, because the process is baked in year after year for that ongoing evaluation and building upon it. Next slide. So we end where we began. And I kept this slide tucked in as I was doing my research and developing the presentation. And when I went back to it, I realized that the research that I did on effective collaboration confirms what I told you last year. So I feel like I get a good pat on the back for that. I love it when that happens. But the conversations with the NASHIA members around the country are also putting these strategies into action with really terrific results. So also kind of proving that relationships are important, that ongoing consistent communication is crucial, that you have to have education as a part of what you do all the time, and establishing those accountability checks do aid in long-term success. So I'm just thrilled to see that what I found is playing out in the 4 featured states that I talked to. I really want to thank Stephanie, Chris, Sarah, and April for sharing their stories with me as I was learning about what NASHIA members are doing and how that illustrates good collaboration. So I think we can probably take some questions, but I would find it even more exciting if you all would be willing to share in chat what you're doing to illustrate these principles and make the most of your collaborations. Oh, and I've got all my resources here on the slide, so if you want to study up further, you can. But let's open it up and see what others have to say.
Great, thank you so much, Teja. What a great presentation. And I feel like I've been doing this a really long time, but I learned so much just listening to you today, and such good nuggets to take away. And I love how you incorporated some of the work of the states as highlights, and yeah, it was just very impressive. So thank you for the presentation. We would like to open this up for questions. Maria had put into the chat that we would like for you to be thinking of examples of successful and not so successful collaborations that you'd be willing to chat about. As Teja mentioned, she would love to have a dialogue about some of this. So we're going to try something a little different, and we're going to shut it down if it doesn't go well. But we're going to try to unmute everybody and see if there's people who just want to speak up. So you are, I believe, unmuted at this time. If there's any brave souls out there who'd be willing to share some of your examples, or if you have questions, you can ask those as well. So we'll just give it a minute here and see if someone jumps in.
Yeah, or if Chris, April, Sarah, or Stephanie are on the line and they have anything that they'd like to chime in on or add, I'd love to hear from them too. Some more.
And I believe if you want to talk, you need to unmute yourself. You now have the ability to do that.
In the meantime, I would say, Judy, you and I have been doing a good job of tending our relationship over the couple years now. I can't believe it's a couple years already. But we regularly get together, and we don't just talk about, you know, the purpose of our meeting, but we've gotten to know one another. And you know, I know about your climbing challenge and your upcoming bike trip and some of those things, and that's really critical to successful collaboration.
I agree. Thank you. And I agree that you always set a good example for me. I try to, you know, I want to be Teja when I grow up. In terms of the follow through. And I do think that that's super important. Both of us get busy and maybe miss some things or need a nudge, but modeling that kind of here's what we're accountable for. So it doesn't just feel like we're meeting for the sake of meeting. There's actually movement, there's direction, and we both learn that together in terms of what that would be for us. And we don't always walk into a partnership really clear about where it's going to lead. But once it starts developing, I agree, having that consistency and just following through is excellent.
Shy people on the line today. I was hoping folks would jump in here.
This is April from Alabama. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
hey, April.
I thought it was absolutely a wonderful presentation. Loved it. In particular, along with you combining all of our responses, I was just talking. I didn't realize you pulled all that out. That was wonderful. But I also wanted to say good job on the pictures relating the states or the NASHIA members to the information that we provided overall. I loved seeing the pictures and seeing what the other states had to say as well, and learned so much. So thank you. And I'm glad we got to chat, and just good job all the way around.
Oh, thank you so much, April. I love talking with you and learning what you're doing. You're doing such good things.
Thank you.
Well, Teja and Judy, this is Chris, and I have to follow April because Virginia owes April. So one of the collaborations is learning from each other, and we probably built a lot of our model based on what we were hearing from April, and we had several phone calls from April, and then there were other phone calls that were more teary that had to do with, please tell me how to submit this this grant to the feds. And you may not know how timely this presentation is because we got our announcements just yesterday, but April has been a wonderful supporter and collaborator to us. I want to say what really strikes me about this presentation that I'm going to be really thinking a lot about is the distinction between teamwork and collaboration, something I had never thought a lot about. And April, you go girl, you rock.
Oh, Chris, yesterday I ugly cried all day yesterday because we got the grant, and I told my assistant today I'm not ugly crying today. So Chris, you're not helping that. Great job. I didn't really know the difference between teamwork and collaboration either. I think that gets really confusing at times. So to have that very straightforward, I'll have a different mindset going into this next grant round. That was great information too. I want to piggyback. And Chris, you're wonderful too, and you know it. Thank y'all.
Hi there, I'd like to jump in. Elizabeth Horn with the Disability Law Center, or the PNA in Virginia. And I am thrilled to be hearing this news, Chris, about your efforts at the federal level and the grant that you've gotten. And I know the work that went into that and a lot of the collaboration that we've done along the way to inform that grant. And I'm just really pleased with the presentation today, but I really want to give a shout out to Chris in particular for her dynamism in her advocacy efforts that have done such a great job in setting a wonderful tone in our collaborations. And these are not easy when you're dealing with state organizations and advocacy organizations who oftentimes have somewhat different agendas and sort of keeping the peace, and it can get complicated at times, and she's really brought an expertise to that. I do want to mention one collaboration that we've had within Virginia, directly involving Chris Miller and the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services, has to do with brain injury waivers. And the fact that we don't have one. However, we did sort of discover that the waivers we do have were not being well utilized by individuals with brain injury. And so we set about this past year to change that. And we did some training for all of the brain injury case managers that Chris's agency supports across the state, to help them learn about how to use and apply for the available waivers that we do have. And also in that process, we learned that the brain injury case management software that they're using really didn't flag people very well or at all for eligibility for the waivers. And so then after this training, we got together with them again, and our Medicaid expert got with them, and we began to change the software so that they can now flag for this. So this really took a lot of listening, a lot of checking the titles at the door, as you say, and I think we're all better off for it. When I say all, I really mean our individuals with brain injury and their families who depend on our collaborations, our effective collaborations. So thank you, Chris, for all the work.
And thank you, Elizabeth, for your remarks.
At the risk of turning this into just a big old love fest, I think one of the things that Elizabeth said that's really important, and that we have valued in our collaboration with our state P&A agency, is these are two state agencies that come at the work in different ways and could often be seen as adversaries. And Elizabeth and her colleague at the Disability Law Center of Virginia have really approached us as collaborators and said, let's see what we can do to build capacity. It's very proactive, it's very supportive, it's very reflective of Elizabeth's style, and she has, Teja, going back to one of the things that you really emphasized, she has built the relationship in such a positive way. So we really appreciate that.
Oh, thanks, Chris.
Hi, this is Jamie Peed. I'm a case manager with Eggleston Brain Injury Services. I know Chris and Elizabeth pretty well. And I've got a long background working with other nonprofit organizations and neurologists and doctors in the area. And one thing that was in the presentation, and I believe you quoted Chris on, was saying create personal connections. That has been a really big factor for me. I get a lot of referrals from places where I used to work, and they get some referrals from me. I work for a Center for Independent Living, and that really helped me understand waivers before I started with brain injury services. But one in particular, since I started about between 2.5 and 3 years ago, I was contacted by the Virginia Beach Housing Resource Center because there are a lot of homeless. The homeless population has a large brain injury population. And so they contacted me, and actually I found out that I knew one of the ladies, I forget her title, but she used to run the food bank and she worked at my college, Virginia Wesleyan. And so I knew her, so I called her. She took us for a tour. They came and saw our place. And so I've been able to help a lot of homeless clients, and they've been able to help some of mine with the housing aspect, because that's also a really big need in the brain injury community, is housing resources. I'd like to do that with other cities in the area because there's just so much around here, but it was definitely, that definitely stuck with me about creating personal connections.
Good, Jamie. I'm so glad that that resonated with you, and I appreciate everybody speaking up and proving me right.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you all for being brave and hopping on and sharing your stories. Really appreciate it. So we're just at time, so I want to quickly wrap up the last few slides and say thank you again, Teja, for your great presentation. I think we could go on and dialogue, and that's awesome. So you can see on the slide, we have other training events coming up. NASHIA 2021 webinar and podcast series. Check our YouTube channel. If you're interested in the Leading Practices Academy on Criminal and Juvenile Justice, give us a shout. We're going to be starting a new series in January. We're looking to recruit some new states. We'll put out information about that soon. And then workshops, and of course our conference is coming up too. So next slide, please. There it is. I knew she'd have that in there. So of course we have our State of the States conference coming up, and it's virtual again this year. So we're hoping a lot of people take advantage and register for that. So go check that out. Next slide. And then we would love to have you as a member of NASHIA, where you'll get access to these kind of trainings and other newsletters and events. So if you're not a member of NASHIA, please consider joining us, and you can find information about that at nashia.org. And I think that's it. Thank you so much. Thanks, Teja. You're the best.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right, great. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.